Welcome to the Parkinson Solutions Summit. I'm your host, Dr. Ken Charlin. Today's special guest is Dr. Heather Sandison. I've known Heather for a couple of years now. I've been honored to be a guest on her Reversal of Alzheimer's Disease Summit. And we're going to bring those subjects together as we talk about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and cognitive decline, and really empowering those affected by these diseases to know that, hey, it's not all genetics. It's not just, something that you're just going to have to buckle up and suck it up, as it were, because you are empowered to make changes that ultimately will change the trajectory of your condition. So without further ado, Dr. Heather Sandison, welcome to the Parkinson Solutions Summit 2.0.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a privilege to be here.
Well, I want to start off with something I know that's exciting to you personally, and then we'll kind of dive into things. But you just got off a big book launch, and I think that's so important. You wrote a book. I have a copy of it here. It's also in the background. I see Reversing Alzheimer's. Tell me a little bit about the book, how it kind of came about, your passion for this subject of these diseases that we have been told for so many years that there's nothing that you can do about it. In fact, that you can.
Right. Dr. Charlotte, I came to this as a skeptic. I was trained by my mentor, Dr. Dale Bredesen, back in 2017, because I heard him say at a conference that you could reverse dementia and Alzheimer's. And I was like, wait, what? No, you can't. I've been heard by well meaning, well educated people for years through my training that to suggest you could treat Alzheimer's or do something for someone struggling with Alzheimer's was to give them false hope. Well, now I feel exactly the opposite. After what I've seen working with patients in my clinic, coaching clients, residents at Marama, we have watched the impossible happen. We have watched miracles happen. And at this stage, I think that anyone suggesting there's nothing you can do for dementia or Alzheimer's is actually, uh, they're providing false hopelessness, as Dr. Bredesen would say. And so
I
it's
love
really
that.
important that we arm people, as you mentioned, empower people to make the decisions, the critical decisions, particularly the behaviors, right? The trajectory of our brain health, as you well know, is determined by those small habits that we have every day, those small decisions that we make about what we put in our mouths, how much movement we get, what time we go to bed, the people we engage with, how we manage our stressors. Those decisions that we make every day that feel so small and inconsequential, those add up to change how we age.
Oh, such a huge message. You know, so often there's that perception that, well, it runs in my family, it's in my genes, this is going to happen, it's inevitable. But we know across the board, whether we're talking about cancer, heart disease, neurological disorders, that the vast majority of the factors, of course, that contribute to these diseases involves lifestyle and environment.
Right, exactly. So with the book, what we were trying to do was make this feel really accessible. I wanted to share these stories, these really incredible, heartwarming stories of people who had taken the bull by the horns. They had jumped into the pool, head first, not just dipping their toe, but really taking advantage of Dr. Bredesen's work. And it made sense to them, right? Conceptually, it made sense. Intellectually, it made sense. They wanted to get the benefit of it. And what I saw was that the people who got benefits, they were able to do it and they felt that empowerment. But a lot of people got tripped up because they felt overwhelmed. And so the goal of the book is to break it down, systematize,
Hmm.
create reflection questions. How does this apply to me? Where do I get started? Really applying kind of a coaching lens to how to take this information and make it implementable, actionable, so that you get the benefits that we see in the clinical trials. And so one of the ways that we do that, and with any neurodegenerative disease process, whether we're talking about MS or Parkinson's or, all of the dementias, the Lewy body or excuse me, the Lewy body or the vascular dementia or the frontotemporal dementia, whichever dementia flavor you may be faced with, and regardless of your genetics, in fact, hopefully empowered by your genetics, we can take the root cause level pieces imbalances in these 6 components of brain health, and we can systematically go through them and look for too much, too little in the wrong place or at the wrong time, and then help support the body to get back into homeodynamic balance. And so the
Oh, that's
6
excellent.
components of brain health that I talk about in the book and I take you through addressing are toxicity, nutrients, stressors, structural issues, including molecular structure like genetics, signaling, and infections. And when
Mm.
we can balance each of these components, we get optimization of neuronal health or that cellular function in the brain.
Oh, that's very, very good. So the folks who are watching this, I may say, well, I have Parkinson's. I don't have Alzheimer's, but in fact, first of all, the data tells us that statistics tell us that 20 to 50% of people with Parkinson's develop some form of mild cognitive impairment, not necessarily dementia. But what's really striking is there's an expectation that the mild cognitive impairment associated with Parkinson's is something that comes later. And in fact, we recognize that mild cognitive impairment in Parkinson's actually can be early in the expression of the disease. So we have to be especially proactive. But as time goes on, and we're now in discussions about how to properly stage Parkinson's, there's been a lot of interesting developments in those areas. We now know that perhaps up to 80% of people with Parkinson's will eventually develop dementia, where they're losing their ability to participate in instrumental activities of daily living. They really become much, much more dependent. So we want to head this off at the pass. And again, I think the message that Dr. Heather and I are both sharing is it almost really doesn't matter whether we're talking about Parkinson's or we're talking about Alzheimer's, because the basic principles, the 6 tenets that she's referring to, really underlie both of these disorders.
And with Parkinson's in particular, toxins, 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 toxins. And when I find toxins in an elderly person, right, most of my patients are over 65, as I'm sure yours are. What we have to assume, right, you've been on this planet long enough, you've accumulated some heavy metals, some potential mold toxins, some chemical toxins, certainly, because you've just been around long enough, and we live in a toxic world, unfortunately. And so when we can get some of that out, now the brain can go from attacking and defending, as Dr. Bredesen talks about the brain being like my brainistan, a country. If your country is spending all of its resources fighting and defending against infections or toxins, you don't have the resource for regeneration, right? It's going to go in the direction of neurodegeneration. And so when we can free up that resource, then we can get better function, better optimal neuronal function. And with Parkinson's, although the pathophysiological process is different, it manifests differently, we still have the same triggers. And so going back to that root cause, yes, we're interested in the diagnosis and there are treatments that are slightly different. There are certainly things that we want to prepare for in terms of gait changes and the tremors and this presentation. We want to treat it differently and have care partners who are aware of what to expect with disease progression. However, the underlying cause is it comes back to the same imbalances in toxins, nutrients, stressors, structures, infections, and signaling.
Hmm. So there's a system that you've developed. And if I'm coming to you as a patient and that system is being applied, what is step one? I mean, I want to have some sense of organization here. So yeah, I need to pay attention to toxins or infections, but how do we move through this space
Yeah, many
together?
people ask, do I start with the gut? Do I start with toxins? And with neurodegenerative diseases, these are incurable. And I would stand by that. I still believe that this is not a cure. This is about a lifestyle that maintains the healthiest, optimal neuronal function for you as an individual. And we see that when people fall off the wagon, they go backwards. They get more cognitive decline. Their Parkinson's symptoms get worse. So it's really about adopting a lifestyle. Now,
Hmm.
that being said, if someone is already experiencing symptoms, if we don't have the luxury of prevention, then we want to do everything at once. We are asking for a miracle. We do not want to dip our toe in, right? We want to be like my patients who have gotten these miraculous results and dive in fully. And
Mm,
so we test the first step. I saw a patient today and we do a 90-minute intake. So by the time you get to over 65, you've got a lifetime of medical history that I want to learn about. I'm curious about
mm,
potential toxic exposures. I'm curious about diet and exercise and sleep and stress management and relationships. And of course, your experience. What are you experiencing from a cognitive perspective or from with a Parkinson's? How has your gait changed? What are you able to do? What are your constraints? How is this affecting you in your day-to-day life so that we can understand what does success look like? What does getting better look like? What does getting worse look like? We have a baseline
mm,
of your experience. And then we do the testing. So the testing includes all of those 6 components of brain health. So we're looking at all of the toxins. I think of them in 3 flavors: mycotoxins, metals, and chemical toxicity. We're looking at nutrients. We're looking at the gut. So are you able to digest and absorb? I'm asking for a 24-hour diet recall. What have you been eating? What are you choosing to put in your mouth? And then when we do the stool
mm,
testing, we see, can you digest it? Can you assimilate it? Can you then release what doesn't serve you? Are you having those regular bowel movements? So that's important for nutrition. Are we able to assimilate the foods that we choose to eat? And then I also look at nutrient panels to see if genetically you might require more methylated B vitamins than your neighbor. And so we want
mm,
to look into that and see if there's something we can do from a micronutrient perspective to get you more balanced. With dementia, we tend to recommend an organic ketogenic diet. Now, when it comes to other neurodegenerative diseases, we don't always, like with ALS, we tend to do maintain the carbohydrates, but add ketones. Ketones are very helpful for the brain because the brain prefers to use them as fuel. And as we age, we
mm.
all become somewhat glucose and insulin resistant. We're not as good or as efficient at turning glucose, carbohydrates, sugar, you can use those interchangeably, into ATP, or the fuel our neurons, every cell in our body uses to
Yeah.
have energy. And so when we can flip the switch metabolically and actually use ketones as fuel, we get more energy, more resource for the brain. The brain only makes up 2% of body weight, but 20% of energy expenditure day to day. And so we need plenty of resource that we can actually put to work, that we can actually turn into ATP and utilize.
Mm. One of the things we find in our clinic, and I certainly agree with everything that you said, is that when it comes to nutrition, sometimes we certainly have to eliminate those highly processed foods, those foods that quickly become sugar in the body, those foods that are really very, commonly associated with food sensitivities that may be driving inflammation, at least some of those initially and some of those permanently. Obviously, the very sugary processed foods go away altogether. But the point that I'm getting to is that um, what we've also observed is that uh, as much as the ketogenic diets have scientific validity, sometimes we need to step into them sort of sequentially because my team's observation often is that nutrient density sort of comes first.
Mhm.
And we want to make sure that if you're very often, too often, a ketogenic diet can even go hand in hand with caloric restriction or food restrictions, where the patient, yes, you're in ketosis, but you're really actually starving yourself at the same time. And so it becomes a little more of an advanced strategy where first we have to lay the foundations of let's make sure you're eating real food. Let's make sure you're getting the right nutrients in your body. Let's eliminate those most inflammatory foods, and then we can begin to dial it in toward a more ketone dependent diet.
Yeah, and maybe adding exogenous ketones while
Sure.
doing that can help kind of get the best of both worlds, where there's not significant or severe carbohydrate restriction, but adding those extra ketones that the brain can then potentially use, or even just adding coconut oil, which has
Mm,
medium chain triglycerides that turn into beta hydroxybutyrate, or the ketone that the brain likes to use for fuel. That alone can be helpful for many people. Now, too much too fast can lead to disaster pants. So just 1 tablespoon at a time as you're getting started with coconut oil, but a very simple, easy, accessible way to help your body start to create ketones and burn those while you're changing up your diet.
Now, about a third of the population, as you know, carries a gene called ApoE4, which places a person, at least Caucasians, it's different for different ethnicities, but people of European Caucasian descent at about 3 times the risk for developing late onset Alzheimer's disease. There seems to be other implications with that. And I wonder if you've observed changes in people of high saturated fat diets and the people in those who are ApoE4 positive.
Yeah, this is such a great question. And there is a disagreement. There's controversy in the field around this. So, in my clinical experience, I've seen people with APO34, APO44, APOE44. And so, just to kind of break this down for people, the general population, take the entire planet, about a 13% risk of developing Alzheimer's in your lifetime. If you, with ApoE, you get one copy from mom and one copy from dad. So, you have a 2, 3, or 4, and you get one of those from mom and one of those from dad. Some people want to call this like it's a ratio or it's out of 4. It's not that. It's that you get one from mom and one from dad. So you might have a 2 2, a 3 3, a 4 4, a 3 4. And if you have one copy of 4, you end up with, instead of a 13% chance, a 30% chance of developing dementia in your lifetime. Now, if you have 2 copies of ApoE44, you are well over 50% at risk for developing dementia in your lifetime. And there was a recent Nature paper that essentially suggested that you inevitably will get dementia in your lifetime
Mm,
if you live long enough. And so this is terrifying for people, but I hope also very empowering because there's so much that you can do. Now, to your question, which was, what about saturated fats? So ApoE, it has to do with lipid metabolism, but also it means when you have a ApoE4, you trigger the production of amyloid faster than your neighbor or your spouse who does not have an ApoE4, who's a 3-3 or a 2-3. And so what that means is that we want to certainly restrict saturated animal fats. Now, when it
mm,
comes to MCT and medium chain triglycerides or the coconut oil, the question is, do those saturated fats have the same detrimental effect that the longer chain saturated fats do? And
mm,
some people say yes, that they do, and that people with who are ApoE34 or 44 positive should avoid MCT and coconut oil. Now, Mary Newport, who has extensively studied this, you've probably come across her in your work. She was a neonatologist by training, an MD, but her husband was diagnosed with dementia, and she worked very hard to help him and found that coconut oil in just 24 hours helped his cognitive decline. He's since
mm,
passed away, but she's dedicated her life to finding out more about ketosis for dementia because she saw how powerful it was for her husband.
mm,
So she has found and published research suggesting that the saturated fats found in coconut oil are not at all detrimental to those with ApoE34 or 44.
mm.
And that's been my clinical experience. So what I recommend to anyone listening who's ApoE, if you know you're ApoE4 positive, 1 or 2 copies, get an advanced cardiometabolic workup, right? I do them through Cleveland Heart Labs or Boston Heart. And we look at SDLDL and LP(a) and LPPLA2, and we're looking at ApoB, of course, and we're looking deep into the fractionated lipids to understand your risk. And try it. Put it to
Hmm.
work. See what happens when you add coconut oil and saturated fats and get into ketosis. In the clinical trial we did, we had 17, was it 17 participants? Ugh, I don't remember the exact numbers, but we had a lot of participants who had
Hmm.
ApoE3, 4, and 4, 4, and we did not see detrimental effects on their cardiometabolic panels when we added the saturated fats that were coconut specifically. So I think that you can safely do that and get the benefits of ketosis and the coconut products, even if you are ApoE4 positive. Now, I know that that's controversial, and you will find other
Right.
people who disagree.
Well, I wonder if you've looked at just using the ketone salts or ketone esters, the butyrate, directly ingesting butyrate, basically.
Yeah, so I think I have a personal bias against them because they taste terrible, and I think they taste like gasoline. Now, there's ketone salts and ketone esters, and ketone salts, they do come in powder form. That's what I tend to like because I don't have to taste it. But some people like the taste. It's quite sweet, and so you can use
Hmm.
it particularly when you're getting into ketosis. If you're going in the direction of carb restriction, or if you've decided you're not going to do carb restriction, you can add the exogenous ketones as an extra fuel source. And you can drink that in between meals as a snack. Now, the ketone esters, so that's ketone salts. And if you have salt sensitive hypertension, some people are on salt restriction. And so that can be
Mm,
a challenge. But the ketone esters, they don't have salt and they are fantastic at really increasing that ketone level. A lot of
mm,
professional athletes will use them as an extra fuel source. So bikers, the long distance bikers, all kinds of professional athletes will use them, but they'll get your ketones up to like 5 millimoles. Whereas if metabolic ketosis, usually you're going to be between 1 and maybe 3 at the high level. And
mm,
typically that's where you're going to go with ketone salts as well. But those ketone esters, although they taste like gasoline, they
mm.
also can be fuel like gasoline. You can turn that
There
into
you go.
charging. Yeah.
That's the mindset you have to take when you're consuming
Yeah.
this stuff. Oh, well, that's very good. It's very helpful. And, in our brain tune-up program here in Ozark, we actually test ApoE4 status on all our patients because this is not just relevant to Alzheimer's disease. And we know that people who carry this particular gene variant, ApoE4, if they have Parkinson's, are at even greater risk for developing uh, dementia associated with their Parkinson's or Lewy body dementia. And it applies to MS, it applies to ALS. And, I think Dr. Bredesen, for me, really was the person who emphasized that, knowing your ApoE4 status isn't necessarily, a bad thing. And now it's available by consumer health testing. Again, I think what Dr. Heather is saying here, and I'm saying, Dr. Bredesen says, all of us, is that, knowledge is power and knowledge is empowering. And so if you understand that this gene seems to respond more robustly to inflammatory signals in the environment, then it should empower us as individuals, our patients, to pay attention to those inflammatory drivers and make extra effort to really double down and address them.
Exactly. And if we know this, gosh, when we're in our 20s, we can start making those lifestyle decisions that will benefit our health and our brain health in particular for the rest of our lives. ApoE44 status or 3,4 status, any ApoE4 positivity, it also puts us at risk for heart disease
Mm,
because of this dysregulated lipid metabolism. And so it is something that I think is very empowering to know. 10, 12 years ago, when I was first starting out in my practice, I would discourage people from getting it because it caused anxiety and it felt like there was nothing they could do.
mm.
Now it's
Oh,
exactly the opposite. There is so much that we know about how to mitigate the risk associated with those genetic markers.
wow. So we've kind of touched on toxins. I don't know that we've gotten into sort of the detoxification dimension of it, but we've certainly talked a little bit about the exposures that are relevant here. And maybe we can talk a little bit about detox. And I don't know if we'll get to all six components, but maybe we can touch on some of the other ones as
Yeah,
well.
and sleep is one I think in the Parkinson's conversation, we can't miss sleep, but yeah, toxins. So with toxins, I like to start with the emunctories is the big fancy word that we use for organs of elimination in the naturopathic community. And this is our bowels, our liver, our skin, our lungs, and our kidneys. Lungs get forgotten a lot. But so we want to make sure we're having a daily bowel movement, at least one daily bowel movement. If you're not, that's where I start with every patient. We've got to get your bowels moving. Number two is liver. Liver needs phase 2 liver detox is so crucial. And having enough nutrients for that is key to maintaining phase 1 liver detox. And the
Mm,
body's divine design and its ultimate wisdom, it will slow down phase 1 liver detox if you don't have enough nutrients for phase 2. And this is because some of those intermediate metabolites are actually more toxic than the thing that you
mm,
consume. And so we want to make sure that the liver has, I think of every supplement company has a multivitamin for the liver phase 2 detox support. These are
mm,
things like methyl donors and maybe some milk thistle and NAC and all kinds of, there's glutathione certainly can be helpful for the liver as well. phosphatidylcholine to keep the bile moving. There's a lot we
Mm,
can do to support, typically nutritionally, the liver, and even eating things like potentially beets if you're not in ketosis, but artichokes and things and cruciferous veggies, your cabbage and
mm,
cauliflower and broccoli and kale. Those can really help to support what the liver needs to detoxify. So the emunctories, again, bowels, liver, skin, sweating at least a few times a week for 10 minutes to get
mm.
your skin is your biggest detox organ, and you can get a ton of toxins out through sweat. Now, you want to make sure you rinse after and replace your electrolytes and make sure that you're safe and not alone in the sauna. But that's a great way to move toxins out of the system. And then, fourth is lungs. Lungs get forgotten about, but this is why policemen can do a breathalyzer, right? Is because
Mhm.
we breathe out toxicity. And I don't know if you've ever been to a detox breathwork class, but you can start to smell chemicals in the room
Oh,
after a
wow.
few minutes
Wow.
when people are in there. I'm like, who's painting? Nobody. It's just people breathing out the
Oh my
chemicals
God.
that we absorb. It is wild. So this is a
Mm,
very underutilized organ, in my opinion. For the lungs help us maintain acid base balance in the body. They're doing so much, and we kind of don't think about it or acknowledge it enough. But it's something that we can put into practice that also helps the nervous system to get into a rest, digest, and heal state when we put these detox breath practices to work. And then lastly is the kidneys. And here,
mm,
just maintaining healthy blood sugar levels. High blood sugar is very hard on the kidneys. And then drinking plenty of clean filtered water, making sure you're not drinking out of plastic, but drinking out of
mm.
ceramic, glass, or stainless, and keeping, things, your water soluble toxins moving out of the system as much as possible is what we're aiming for there.
Oh, yeah. I want to add a couple of things because you used the word, but we didn't dive into it too much, and that is sleep is relevant to detoxification.
Mhm.
The glymphatic system of the brain that is most active while we sleep. So we're detoxing both the brain and the body, of course. But sleep is so critical. But circling back around to Parkinson's, one thing that's especially common in Parkinson's, probably my guesstimation would be, 80 to 90% of people with Parkinson's suffer from chronic constipation. And
Mhm.
in fact, I saw a patient today in clinic who was recently hospitalized for bowel impaction, multifactorial, of course, but the underlying, and I'll use a medical term, pathophysiology, if you will, of Parkinson's and what's happening with the gut plays a major role in why people develop constipation. Now, I explain to folks that, again, there are multiple factors. There's microbiome changes. Of course, there's dietary fiber, hydration, movement in general that helps keep the bowels moving. But if we think of Parkinson's stereotypically as a movement disorder, that slowness of movement, the shuffling gait, I want people to think that the same thing is happening in their digestive tract. And so we really have to employ strategies for effective detoxification through the bowels that promote movement, that promote motility. Now, one of the things that I commonly see, because folks can go to their Walmarts or CVS or Walgreens, whatever their favorite store, and buy all kinds of things that are largely stool softeners, and that may be somewhat helpful, but again, if we think about motility, that's really not going to address motility. There are medications that can improve motility, but Dr. Heather, I'm wondering from your perspective as a naturopathic doctor, can you share some naturopathic strategies that may improve motility?
Yeah, I tend to start with the osmotic laxatives, magnesium, particularly magnesium citrate. Magnesium oxide is another one that can be very helpful. It tends to be a little bit more explosive. So I tend to start with magnesium citrate And then vitamin C is another one. And when we put those together, you can't do a gram of vitamin C at breakfast, lunch, and dinner and have it help with your bowels. You really need a lot all at once. What vitamin C and magnesium are doing are they're pulling water into the bowel so that you can
Mm,
get your bowels flowing more regularly. And so
mm,
I, like you, think that is crucially important to brain health, general, full body health, and have seen that in Parkinson's patients as well, that it comes with constipation quite commonly. And so, all of the bowel training habits and everything we can do life from a lifestyle perspective to with exercise and water and fiber, everything we can do there, and then adding magnesium and upping the dose until we get that regular, well-formed daily bowel movement.
mm. Are there any herbal supplements or herbs that you're aware of that specifically improve the movement of the gut, the natural motility?
So certainly senna, cascara, and then aloe, the latex, the outer leaf of the aloe plant can also be helpful. They tend to be more dependence forming. And so if you don't have Parkinson's, or if you're not working with a provider, I don't recommend starting there. They can also cause more cramping in the bowel and be quite uncomfortable. So I recommend starting with magnesium.
Absolutely. It's a fine line. And chances are if you have Parkinson's and suffer from constipation, we're really going to have a long-term plan. But starting with the basics of magnesium and vitamin C and just hydration and making sure you're eating lots of veggies for your insoluble fiber and so forth is certainly going to put things in the right direction. And maybe what are your thoughts about adding some sort of probiotic or at least living foods, some fermented foods?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. Also as we age, our digestive enzymes can sometimes not be as robust as when we're younger. And so adding some broad spectrum digestive enzymes, proteases and lipases, and all of the ases, plus some hydrochloric acid or some betaine HCl,
Mm,
that can be helpful for digestion and also prevent the bad bugs from growing in the wrong places in the gut. And then adding fermented foods and probiotics, getting as we talked about before, getting the sugars down so that we starved off the candida and the bad bacteria can also be very helpful. I like using things like glutamine, and the aloe, the inner leaf of the aloe can be very soothing for the GI tract. So glutamine, aloe, deglycinated licorice, slippery elm, these can be great herbs to use for gut repair and healing. But that combination of killing off the bad guys, adding some support to the inner lining of the gut, the enterocytes, that's a fancy word for the cells of the
mm,
gut, and then getting the right bugs moved in and adding those digestive enzymes. That tends to be, and of course, magnesium to keep the bowels moving. That tends to be a
yeah.
good kind of gut reset plan for most people.
That's excellent. I think you mentioned one of the other components that's really key, and I'm going to tell you I'm cherry picking just a little bit because I know our Parkinson patients, these are things that really tend to affect them the most. And I think you touched on stress as one of the major components, if I recall.
Yes, so stress is absolutely, it goes in both ways though, right? What we want is balance. So we don't want too much stress because too much stress becomes toxic to the brain. Cortisol itself will become toxic to the brain when it's too high for too long. But if
Yeah.
we don't have purpose and meaning, right? If we don't have a reason to get up and out of bed, that can also be detrimental. We need
Mm,
something to rub against, right? We need a challenge. This is very much a use it or lose it situation. And so we have this conversation when it comes to exercise, when it comes to engaging the brain cognitively. We want to be engaged. So we don't want to sit back and relax and indulge all the time. That will become harmful, too much of a good
mm,
thing. No, well, sleep is another one that comes up, and we can talk more about stress. I'm happy, like we do 4-point cortisol testing, and if somebody has too much stress at night, that can keep them from sleeping. So we talk about phosphatidylserine, 5-HTP potentially. Some people have trouble getting to sleep, falling asleep because of stress. But the reason I want to talk about sleep so much here is because I've really changed my tune on this. I used to wait for someone to tell me that they snored or see that they were overweight or that they were male and then test them for sleep apnea. But I have
mm.
had so many thin women who either don't have a partner or their partner wears hearing aids they take out at night so they don't hear them snore. who wouldn't know, wouldn't think that they're at the top of the list of someone that might have apnea. And sure enough, they come back with severe obstructive sleep apnea when we
Hmm.
force the test on them. And they respond so well to CPAPs. Now, we want to get a minimum of 7 hours of sleep per night for the vast majority of people, minimum of 90 minutes of REM sleep, and a minimum of 60 minutes of deep sleep. And don't lose sleep over those numbers. This is just ballpark, right? So
Right.
don't get too attached to that. I wear an Aura ring. It interests me. As we get older, those numbers tend to go down. That amount of time tends to go down. So don't get too hung up. That's like a ballpark what we be aiming for. Now, Parkinson's, and you can speak to this, you're more of an expert than I am. The REM sleep disorders that basically are pathognomonic for eventually, right? They destine you for Parkinson's at this stage, is my understanding that these sleep disorders, detecting them earlier on and treating them as aggressively as possible, working closely with neurology to get your sleep dialed, even when it's challenging, I think is worth prioritizing because I personally, in the dementia space and the Alzheimer's space, even in the mental health space, sleep is crucial. We cannot function without it. It's not a wait till we die, we can sleep when we die kind of
Hmm.
situation. This really is something that we need to protect and prioritize as we age, but even before that.
Oh, yes, no doubt about it. We know that REM sleep behavioral disorder, constipation, mood changes, we often call these premotor, premonitory symptoms, appearing in some cases decades before the onset of that unilateral tremor, shuffling gait, blank facial expression. That those motor symptoms are probably not the start of Parkinson's. So recognizing these early and then taking those proactive preventative steps to address the gut, to address inflammation, uh, all of the things we've talked about may hopefully kick the can down the road, or in some cases, prevent you from developing full-blown Parkinson's altogether.
Yeah,
So
this
very good solutions.
Yeah, I think the sleep piece and getting a sleep study, one of the best things that came out of COVID, in my opinion, as a clinician, was the advent of more technology around at-home sleep studies.
Yes.
They're not perfect. They don't, it's even
Yeah.
better to do an in clinic overnight sleep study. But for anyone that struggles, whatever the constraints are with getting that in-person sleep study done, or in clinic sleep study done, do the at home ones. We do the watch pat. We connect people with watch pat to do that at home. And I think the technology is such that at least we can rule in sleep apnea and then get that treated a lot quicker for people.
Most definitely. I would say a huge percentage of my patients, and certainly all that are engaging me in more of a functional medicine therapeutic lifestyle approach, are going to at least start with an overnight pulse oximetry study. And that can be extremely motivating and say, look, your oxygen saturation got to 88% or below for a total of X number of minutes. Let's say it's even 5 minutes. It might seem, well, you slept for 8 hours. It's only 5 minutes. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to look at my watch and I want you to hold your breath for 5 minutes right now. Oh, no way, right? No way. Well, guess what? You did that while you were sleeping, and your blood is bringing, you breathe, you oxygenate your blood. That in turn brings that oxygen to all the organs of your body, including your brain. So imagine what is happening night after night after night after night. So
Essentially, it's
important.
mild brain damage. And
Yes,
I'm not, as a brain doctor, like that is not okay with me. Even if it's
not okay.
mild sleep apnea, we need to be aggressively treating. And mouth tape is something that can help a lot of people, particularly if it's mild sleep apnea. You can treat that with mouth tape. People will tell me, well, I'm not going to wear the CPAP anyways. That's not the
Mm,
only option.
mm,
There are oral
yes,
devices, there's APAPs, there's the travel version. There's so
mm,
many different types of
yeah.
masks. You can often find one that will work for you. And it is so worth it to get that good restorative sleep at night.
No doubt. And I'm very much interested in transparency and honesty because it's easy to come to the doctor and say, well, you're taking your medicine. Oh, yeah, I'm taking my meds. Are you using C? Oh, yeah, I'm using my C. Like, Look, it's in a way, I don't mean to sound cruel or sarcastic, but hey, it's no skin off my back if you're not using your CPAP or taking your meds or your supplements or doing your, therapeutic lifestyle plan, but it's for you. And my goal is to help you. And what can we do to navigate this together? Because sometimes it is really hard. Sometimes it's easier to not wear the CPAP than wear it. But where are the challenges? Where are the hurdles? What can we do together to navigate this so you can be successful in the long run?
Right, communicating with your doctor, what are your constraints? What's keeping you from doing it? Because there's like we've discussed, right? There's this overwhelming amount of things that we can do to optimize brain health. So we're bound to find one thing that you can start doing that's going to make a meaningful difference. So it's a matter of communication and letting us know so that we can work together to collaborate to get you the best possible outcomes.
Now, I wanted to just quickly circle back around to stress before we wrap up, because stress certainly affects every disease you and I know of. Stress modulates memory and Alzheimer's disease. Stress has a very special role to play in Parkinson's for a couple of different reasons. Our patients are very aware of stress. They will say, my tremor is worse, my gait is worse, more likely to fall, I have more trouble speaking clearly with Parkinson's. But stress and anxiety and dopamine, the core neurotransmitter of that sort of defines Parkinson's, are all wrapped up together. And while we may experience stress in our lives due to circumstances, whatever they might be, a bill to pay, a family member who's ill, those are very understandable. But it's important to understand that there's sort of a biological stress, a biological anxiety that is very much part of the Parkinson's disease itself. And so helping folks to understand that, first of all, and then how to harness uh, what dopamine we can, because if you have stress, you may find yourself just like, I'm frozen, right? I don't want to do anything. I can't, it's that fight, flight, or freeze. But then with Parkinson's as well, you have those lower dopamine levels that not only affect what we call the extrapyramidal system that's involved in automatic movements, but it's frontal lobe too. It's I don't have the motivation. I don't want to do a lot of things. And so
Mhm.
it becomes very, very self-defeating, especially when you're talking about lifestyle factors. So finding ways to stimulate that motivation, we have to dig down a little deeper. Just curious if you have discovered some ways that people can stimulate some dopamine response in their brain when their tank is running a bit low.
So drumming is one that comes up often. I don't know if you've talked to anybody about that on this summit, but that's one that comes up over and over again, that people go into a drumming circle or drumming class with Parkinson's and walk without a shuffle
Mm.
on out of the class, and it naturally stimulates dopamine production. Even in those with Parkinson's. I mean, it's just really miraculous. And then also the intentional walking. I'm sure you're familiar with this. It's in Norman Doidge's book, The Brain's Way of Healing. And there are these approaches to very intentional, slow walking that people with Parkinson's can practice. It's a very mindful way of walking that I think can modulate
Mm.
stress, but also can help with the manifestation, the gait, and the manifestation of Parkinson's symptoms in both gait and tremors. So I don't know how much you're talking to this audience about that, but what we see with
Oh,
dementia,
yeah.
kirtan kriya is a form of meditation that can help with stress management, but also helps with the length of telomeres, inflammation, with pain, with glucose and insulin resistance, with I mean, just pretty much any of the causal level factors that we talked about. Kirtan kriya, just 12 minutes a day, totally free. You can
Mm.
stream it on YouTube, has significant benefit for cognition,
Mm.
especially. So that's a great, quick, easy, free way with a ton of data. I mean, meta-analyses suggesting how profoundly impactful this interventions of meditation can be.
Yes. Exercise, 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 and find the one that, ultimately you can be passionate about, that you enjoy doing, that you can make a daily habit. And drumming is certainly wonderful. There's boxing, there's cycling, and all of these things have data behind them, and they all stimulate the release of dopamine. And
Wait,
we even
boxing. You just said boxing. As long as nobody's hitting your head,
no, right,
you're
right.
not allowed
This
to
is
spar.
there's a branded boxing program called Rock Steady Boxing that a lot of our patients participate in, and it's with a punching bag. But it's
Great.
kind of fun, It's like Rocky, climbing up the steps of the Philadelphia Public Library. So it can be very empowering. And then, of course, the cold water plunges, things like
Mhm.
that, are
Love, I
really
mean, personally, that is something that I love.
well, Dr. Heather Sandison, 45 or so minutes goes so quickly. And I really, really appreciate you spending your time with us, enlightening us on some strategies to help the brain, whether we're talking about Alzheimer's, dementia in general, and Parkinson's. It's all the same message. It's the same message. We want people to know that there are steps that they can take to improve the trajectory of their lives, even in the context of these diagnoses. Just
Doc-
curious. So I know people will want to find you, learn more about you, read your book. Tell me a little bit about how we do that.
So Dr. Heather Sandison, Sandison, drheathersandison.com. You're welcome to follow me there, get our newsletter, research updates, notices of what we're doing, what we're up to, how we are hoping to reduce the suffering associated with Alzheimer's and dementia worldwide. And then my book, Reversing Alzheimer's, is out now and available wherever books are sold.
That's wonderful. And congratulations. It's a wonderful book. I've enjoyed reading it. I keep it in my library and turn to it from time to time for reference. So you've created a great resource for folks. I highly recommend folks purchase that.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Charlene. It's such a privilege to be here with you.
Look forward to reconnecting soon.